Well, good evening and welcome to another Behind the Book, a special Caltech presentation coming from Public Programming, which has been producing a number of different special events throughout this pandemic. And we welcome you all with us tonight for another exciting opportunity to hear directly from an author about a book. And in this case, it's really something quite special. We're going to be hearing about the book, Poems of the Planets, Solar System Science in Verse and Prose, written by Eric Guerin, a 1968 graduate of Caltech. And before we get into the full introductions, I just want to acknowledge a few things. First off, I want to thank the Caltech Credit Union and the Friends of Beckman Auditorium, whose ongoing support have been very important to not only programs like Behind the Book, but to our Science Journey presentations, which you can still find online if you go to events.caltech.edu. And you can also find out about the other events that we're going to be producing come the new year here at Caltech. Tonight's program is going to feature Eric being interviewed by one of our fellow techers, Cameron Hummel, and we're also going to be able to have a chance to hear from the science advisor on this book, Catherine DeClaire. The format is going to be that we're going to give them about a half an hour to have a conversation and tell us a lot about the book itself. And then we will open this up for questions from all of you. So we encourage you now that you are in the interview portion of it, you can put your questions into the Q&A section on your screen. Once we flip into the actual Q&A section, though, you can simply raise your hand or type in a question, and our house manager, Ed Brown, will welcome you and introduce you to ask your questions. If you're shy, he'll ask the question for you off of the one that you posted in the Q&A. This is the second to the last of our Behind the Books for the year 2021. On November 18th, we're going to have Carolyn Campbell and Caltech Professor Jed Buchwald covering her book, City of Immortals. The book is based on the cemetery Père Lachaise in Paris, where there are lots of notable artists, scientists, and others buried. And in her book, she actually interviews a number of the ghosts of some of the artists that are buried there. For the purposes of our November 18th, 5 o'clock in the evening presentation, Jed Buchwald is going to become the ghosts of at least 3 of the scientists who are buried there, and Carolyn and he will be engaging in conversation. So we hope you'll join us for that event as well. Again, for more information, you'll be able to go to our website. You'll also be able to sign up for notices about our other events by going to events.caltech.edu. So now I want to introduce our host for this evening, Cameron Hummel. Cameron was a featured guest of ours. He told me 5 years ago when he was one of the lecturers on our series that is now called Science Journeys, which is this special presentation for young people. And when I mentioned to the others on the staff who predate me, I was not here yet at Caltech, but those who remembered Cameron, they said we couldn't have picked a better host. They had just such fond memories of his presentation. And so with that, I would like to now just turn it over to Cameron Hummels to conduct our interview with author Eric Guerin and science advisor Catherine DeClaire.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. Welcome everyone to Behind the Book. I'll essentially be the MC for the next half hour or so, and asking and interviewing Catherine and Eric some of the questions about this book. So Catherine and Eric, can you guys come on? Oh, great. Good to see you guys. Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Quickly, let me introduce both of you to our audience. So Eric Guerin started out with a bachelor's degree at Caltech in 1968 in electrical engineering, and then pursued a master's degree in computer science at USC. But professionally, he's known, he co-founded this organization called Learning Tree International that's been extremely successful over the last 50 years almost, training IT people, employees and managers of IT companies over the last 50 years, doing, something like 60,000 companies in over 100 countries. So like 2.5 million people. It's kind of outrageous how far spread your influence is in terms of your educational work here, much farther than certainly mine as a researcher. Furthermore, he founded Bright Prospect, which is a nonprofit that's helped thousands of low-income students actually get to and attend college, which is, incredible work. Thank you for that. And he's been a huge supporter of science, technology, education, the arts, has sat on the board for Harvard Westlake, one of the premier educational institutions in the LA area, or even in the United States, really, in terms of high schools, for the last 15 years. And he joins us from Park City, Utah, today. You also do astrophotography. I'm definitely going to ask you about that because I'm a big fan of astrophotography myself. And our other guest is Professor Catherine DeClear, who is a professor here at Caltech in planetary sciences. She did her bachelor's in math and physics at MIT, and then did her PhD and her master's at Berkeley, finishing in 2017 in astrophysics. And has been at Caltech since then, either in a researcher mode or more recently as a faculty member. Her research primarily deals with observations of planetary objects in our own solar system, either planets or their satellites and moons, or even smaller objects like asteroids, some of the asteroids in the asteroid belt. And she does observational studies of these, looking at their surfaces, looking at their atmospheres and their composition, to better understand the nature of these things and their origin, and tell us something about the formation of the solar system and the history of the solar system. And in fact, one of the things she works on, which I'm very excited to hear about, is Io, this volcanic object that's orbiting around Jupiter, which one of the poems is actually about. So maybe we'll get to hear about that later tonight. And yeah, welcome to both of you guys. Thank you for joining us today on Behind the Book. So I guess let's start at the beginning. What's for the viewers, what's the book about? I mean, I know because I've read through it, but let's just give a broad introduction to everyone. What's the book about?
The book is primarily about the solar system and the major objects in it, which include the sun, the 8 planets, many different moons of those planets, the asteroid belt, the Kuiper belt, and the Oort cloud. But I've always felt that in terms of learning, it's important not to learn in silos. I think it's really important to make connections between different aspects of knowledge, human knowledge. And so in the poems and the poems refer and then explanations expound on many other sciences and provide an introduction to some basic concepts in chemistry, physics, biology, oceanography, geology, and as well as some history, some mythology, etc. So I want to try to catch the interest of young people, primarily from between 5th and 7th or 8th grades, and stimulate their interest in science and in learning in general.
Yeah, and it's funny though, you say that it's like middle school to high school level text, and yet, as someone who has a PhD in astrophysics, I was still learning things reading through this. So it certainly didn't feel, for our adults in the audience, like, oh, this is a kid's book. It's not really. I mean, sure, that is an appropriate audience, but I think adults, this is an appropriate audience as well, because there's certainly information there. I see. So poetry as well as science combined, basically. Okay.
Poetry was just a mechanism to try to capture the attention of students who both are already interested in science and those who maybe are more interested in the arts and humanities, and this becomes a way into science for them.
Excellent. I dig it. As someone who's a big proponent of public education, I'm a big fan of this. Well, I guess beyond that, can you start out with reading us one of the poems from the book?
Right. Okay. So here's the front cover, and before I dive into the poems, let me just go to the table of contents to give you a little more information about what the book is about. So basically, the poems are structured, sequenced, so they start at the sun and move outward past stopping at the various planets, some of the moons. Two poems about our moon, the Mars, the asteroids, Jupiter, a couple of the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, another moon of Saturn, another general thing about other moons of Saturn, Uranus, and its 27 Shakespearean moons. They're all named for characters in Shakespeare's plays, except for two in a poem by Locke. And then moving on to Neptune, the Kuiper Belt, the Oort cloud, and then a summary poem. So what I'll do is I'll just pick up the vapors of Venus, which is a good starting point, I think. Okay, is that showing up on the screens?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, great. I can make it a little larger. So we'll start out with the vapors of Venus. The Romans had a god of love, and Venus was her name. They named this planet for that god, and it's still named the same. About the same size as the Earth, with climate never placid, it is a hot, corrosive spot concealed by clouds of acid. Now, Venus has an atmosphere that's mostly CO2. It traps in sun's strong energy, which heats the surface through. Because of this, the temperature bakes Venus till it's toast, the hottest of the planets. Yes, on Venus you would roast. At 90 times the weight of ours, its atmosphere will crush. The pressure is so great it might just squeeze you into mush. The surface is a desert dry with towering mountain peaks. Around volcanoes large and small, no water flows in creeks. This planet lies between sun and earth, so Venus is a sight we only see before the dawn, or else in early night. The brightest object in our sky, except for sun and moon, a sweeter scene you'll seldom see. Go look at Venus soon. So that's the poem. And then you'll notice in a number of places in the poem, there are footnotes or reference numbers to footnotes, which are on the page or pages that follow it. And so they tie down here to further explanations of the various points that were, just covered briefly in the poem. And so, for example, we talk about CO2 acts like first, the atmosphere of Venus is composed almost entirely of carbon dioxide. Each carbon dioxide molecule has one carbon atom, C, attached to two oxygen atoms. O2 is pronounced O2. So its chemical symbol is CO2, pronounced CO2. So that's just a very brief introduction to a chemical formula and a chemical concept. So then I go on to say that CO2 acts like a blanket, preventing the surface heat of Venus from radiating back into space. As a result, the temperature on Venus gets as high as 880 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that into perspective, consider the water boils at just 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and lead, a soft metal, melts at 622 degrees Fahrenheit. Then there are other references. For example, I mentioned that it's named after Venus, so there's a statue of Venus. I had to be careful in my selection of the photographs because I wanted this to be a PG rated book. A nice photo of the sulfuric acid droplets in Venus well above the surface. Some more information about the atmospheric pressure. I talked about that. the pressure on Venus is over 1,300 pounds per square inch, whereas on Earth it's less than 15 pounds per square inch. So the atmospheric pressure, it might actually crush you, especially if you're subjected to it suddenly or didn't have appropriate gases to breathe. And I came across an interesting factoid, which I thought might interest some of the readers. So that the highest pressure ever survived by a human was accomplished by a Greek diver, Theo Mavrotomos, who lived in a pressure chamber for 43 days, breathing a special gas mixture while the pressure was increased to 997 pounds per square inch and then back to 14.7 pounds. And then the pressure of Venus is 34% greater than that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So then another kind of thing to explain it about where Venus was only seen at dawn or the early night is a diagram that shows that Venus can't be seen here because you're looking basically right at the sun, and it can't be seen in its orbit here because it's behind the sun. So the only time we see it is when it's off to the side of the sun, either here when we would see it just before or after sunset, or over here where we would see it just before or just after sunrise. So that gives you an idea of what the footnotes look like as well as a typical poem. I hope I haven't gone on too long.
Oh, no, that's great. And I think that's what makes this book unique, is that, you know, there are a lot of books on poetry, and there's a lot of even astronomy themed poetry books. But the nice thing about this is it provides these endnotes with actual critical information about the objects that we're talking about or viewing. So for someone like me, an astronomer or Professor DeClear, you know, this is really cool. Catherine, can you, Venus, so I really like that you chose Venus here, Eric, to read to us, because I think Venus is super interesting, particularly in the last couple of months. It's been really interesting because a bunch of news has come out regarding our plans to visit Venus with upcoming missions. Catherine, can you speak to that at all? I remember reading the headlines, but I don't remember the details. I think there are a couple of missions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So earlier this year, NASA just selected 2 missions that will both go to Venus. This is through NASA's Discovery program, and they're going to study completely different aspects of Venus. One of them is going to look at the atmosphere, try to understand the atmospheric chemistry better, and the other is going to map the surface. So they both relate to this really interesting question that is highlighted in the poem of, you know, is Venus volcanically active? What does its past volcanism look like? How did that volcanic activity shape the surface and the atmosphere, this sort of corrosive atmosphere, the CO2 that Eric is talking about in the poem? And so in the next phase of NASA missions, we're going to have 2 going there studying this features of the surface and of the atmosphere, and just trying to understand, you know, from our closest neighboring planet, what happened there, and how did we get these divergent pathways where we have Earth the way it is now, and Venus just looking so different.
Catherine, I've got a question for you, which is, I just thought of it. Maybe I shouldn't be asking it now, but past probes that have missions that have landed on Venus have only lasted a few days at the most because of the pressure and the corrosive atmosphere. Are these expected to be able to survive longer? And if so, do you have any idea what they're doing differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit outside my knowledge. My understanding was that both of these missions were orbiters. I'm not sure if there is a lander component.
So it was my understanding that, let's see, one is Da Vinci Plus and the other is
Veritas.
I think Veritas is an orbiter, and I think Da Vinci Plus will actually have a lander aboard a parachute that takes a very, very long time to land, so it can take compositional samples of different chunks of atmosphere at different altitudes. And then I do believe there is a component that will actually land and take data, although again, the period over which it will be able to take data on the surface is not very long, like less than a day, just because it's as you said, the pressure, and as is described in the book, the pressure, the acidity of the atmosphere, all of these things contribute to a very violent and difficult place to survive.
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, good choice of poems there. Yeah, I actually, again, I learned stuff in the end notes here. You had a reference to something called a virga, which is this rains that fall from the sky but never make it to the ground, which I guess is something that happens in certain dry areas here on the Earth's surface, but is reasonably common on Venus. I had, as an astrophysicist, I had no idea about that phenomenon. So there's plenty to learn for everyone here, at all audiences, I think. And it's put in a very nice way. So I wanted to ask, really, what was the genesis of this project, that writing a book of poetry about space, and how did it incorporate, how did Catherine get involved in this as well? I'll let you expound.
This was an accidental project. When our children were in elementary school, almost 30 years ago now, I started writing some kids' poems. And they were, they were reasonable poems, not fantastic poems, but reasonable poems. And I put them away in a folder, physical file folder. And I figured, maybe one day I'll get back to them. Okay, fast forward 20 plus years, our daughter is going to have her first child, and they're living in Brooklyn. So my wife, Nancy, and I went back east, rented an Airbnb unit to be there for a couple of months to help her out. And I was looking for various files that I wanted to take because I still needed to do some work. And there, as I'm looking through the files, out comes this folder that I had lost for 20 years of the kids' poems. So I thought, oh, that's cool. I'll take them. Maybe I can do something with them. So there we were back in Brooklyn, and between washing dishes and doing the laundry and once in a while playing with our newborn granddaughter, we would be back at the apartment. So I started looking through these poems, and there was a poem I had no recollection of, which was only about 2/3 finished, and it was a tour of the solar system. And so I just started working on it, and I finished it off, and that essentially became the first poem in this book, the overview of the whole solar system. And then I got the idea, well, maybe it'd be cool to sort of write a poem about each planet. And then one thing led to another, and after a while I thought, maybe I could get this thing published. So I looked around on the web to find out, how do you get published? And I found out there is a National Society of Children's Writers and Book Illustrators. Who knew? So I joined that, and I went to their national conference was coming up in New York. So I went, and they had presentations by publishers and editors and things like that. And I became very discouraged because it sounded to me like trying to get your book published by Scholastic Press or some other, major academic publisher is very time consuming, very lengthy. So I just sort of put it aside. About a year ago, a friend of mine was talking about how he had just self-published a novel and how it was doing well on Amazon. So I said, how does that work? And it turns out you can self-publish novels or any other book, and Amazon will print them, or they'll make them available, electronically in a Kindle format, or print them. And so I decided that's what I would do. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to publish this, I'm not an astronomer. I'm not a planetary scientist. I did my best as someone who is scientifically trained to be as accurate as possible. But I realized I need some advice on this. And so I went on the Caltech website and I looked at the various faculty in planetary science, and Catherine just stood out head and shoulders above the others, primarily because she had already done a lot of outreach. And so I thought maybe she would be interested. So I emailed her and sent her a couple of poems, and she responded positively, which is still surprises the heck out of me, but I really appreciate it. So Catherine, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, when Eric first emailed me and asked for input on a kid's book involving poetry, my first thought is, does this really require the expertise of a planetary science professor? And then I looked at the excerpt he sent, and we had a Skype conversation, and it was clear that the sort of level of detail and level of rigor and accuracy that he wanted in this book, actually did make my expertise relevant. And the poems, as you just saw, they're super fun and catchy. They're fun to read. The footnotes are great. They just have so many interesting facts. And then those little diagrams of the observing geometry that really bring home things like the phases of the moon or why you only see Venus in the morning. I just really liked the way that he had framed it all and the level of rigor that he wanted to bring to it. He doesn't oversimplify things. He really takes students' curiosity and scientific interest seriously. And just tries to satisfy that curiosity on all fronts, from how did the planets get their names to, why is Venus's atmosphere CO2? Just all of these sort of angles, trying to answer all the questions. And I don't know, I was excited about the project and wanted to get involved, and really did feel like, because of the level of rigor and detail that he wanted in the book, that what I had to offer was relevant. And it's been a lot of fun to work on it. We've had a lot of back and forth about various facts and footnotes to include or not include, things to fact check. Various of my responses to him have involved links to papers that were published in the past 5 years. I mean, the information in this book is very accurate and up to date, impressively so, given the intended audience. So I think it's really unique.
That's awesome. That's awesome that there's like checks on recent papers. Did you get to incorporate any of your own research into a footnote here or there?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think some of the things that I've worked on have sort of framed the aspects that I contributed. We stopped short of actually including links to scientific papers in the book.
People aren't going to click on an ADS link and go to the Icarus paper or something. Well, it's great that there's rigor behind the art and the aesthetic there. So one thing I noticed when you were showing us the artwork that's included, both the images and the illustrations, is really spectacular. It really stands alongside the quality of the poems themselves.
Thank you.
Are those real images of some of these astronomical bodies, or are they artists' conceptions, or is it a mix of both?
The almost all of them are actual photographs. The vast majority are from NASA, some from the European Space Agency or Japanese Space Agency, because I've done some astrophotography. Most of it is deep sky objects, galaxies and nebulae, but planetary astrophotography you need extremely stable atmospheric conditions to get good images, and where I am in Park City, I just don't have that. Also, it's one thing taking an astrophotograph from here with a 20-inch telescope, 20-inch diameter telescope, compared with Cassini flying by a few thousand miles from these objects and taking a high resolution image without any atmosphere in the way. And so the quality of those images from those space agencies and the missions that have gone out are phenomenal. There are a few artists' conceptions, for example, the illustration of the asteroid belt. Well, asteroids are very dark and they're very far apart. So there's a photograph is just not going to be interesting. And so for something like that, or of the Kuiper belt or the Oort cloud, but those are really I think we have one artist conception of what the surface of Titan might look like. But other than that, everything are real photographs.
That's great. Is it just logistically, is it difficult to get the permission to use these? Or I guess if it's done by NASA, it's all in the public domain, so you can.
That's the best part of all. NASA, it's all public domain. But from the Japan, I had to inquire, and they had a process to go through, an amazingly bureaucratic process. But it was straightforward to go and get that. There are some photographs that came from other sources, and we were able to, secure the rights. And there are some of the photos that actually come from there are stock photo sites. And so the artists that put this together have a subscription to that site, and they can use any photo in any of their works. And so that just automatically gave permission without having to go to the original source of the photograph. It made it much easier.
I'm quickly going to show, so images of Mercury or Venus, obviously the Earth, but at some level, this could almost be a picture book, even without the poems present in the scientific information, just because it's so beautifully done.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. You also there at the end, you had a really well done glossary. Just being astronomy is so full of jargon. Even people in, I'll go to a research talk by a colleague in a field that's not my own, and I get lost within 5 minutes because they start using this acronym or that acronym, or using all of this jargon. So it was really useful to have the full glossary at the end that provided, pretty deep information about what the heck was going on. Thank you for including.
Yeah. And I also, in the glossary, I tried to, again, take a tutorial approach, so that in many cases, by looking up a word, it actually expands on the knowledge base compared with just what is in the footnote, which is expanding upon what was in the poem. So it's almost a third level of depth that an interested reader could go to.
So with your astrophotography, did you find that you were able to incorporate, you said you weren't able to use any of the images that you've done, but were you able to incorporate any of the, I guess, the motivation or aspects of your astrophotography that you've been involved with? Obviously, that's close to your heart, so perhaps the book is tied to that.
Maybe just that's part of why I wanted so many images. Is I find it fascinating. I do have, I don't know, half a dozen of my images in the book.
Oh, you do?
But,
cool.
but not of the planetary. I think when I introduced the concept of a nebula, I've got a picture of the Eagle Nebula that
you took.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
And there's a solar eclipse that I got, etc. So okay, so over here, when I'm talking about
astrophotography is really impressive.
Yeah, when I talk about the origin of stars and how they form in nebulae, this is a photograph of the Eagle Nebula, which is one that I took. Let's see, at some point where okay, here this page where we have an eclipse of the sun. I used my own image from the eclipse that occurred in 2017. So there are a few of my images in here.
Yeah, that eclipse was so stunning. Perhaps some of our audience members were able to experience it either by being there or even watching. We had an event here at Caltech actually that was just viewing the partial, which of course wasn't as stunning as the total. I'm impressed that you took a picture. I was too busy gawking at it with my own eyes to have time to fiddle with a camera myself. But yeah, that's a very good image. But this kind of broaches the next question, and that is, do you have plans? I mean, this is the aspects of this particular book deal with the solar system and the many objects in our solar system. Do you have plans to have some sort of subsequent book that's dealing with other aspects of astronomy or deeper objects into the universe, as opposed to just our local universe?
The answer is that I think it depends on how the sales of this book go.
Okay.
If I don't lose too much money on this, then yes, we'll do other books. And I'm not sure whether it would be more books on astronomy or just other books in the science area. I mean, whether it could be on basics of chemistry or molecular structures or biological structures. I could see a whole book about the cell and the organelles within the cell, and something about how the DNA mechanism works and how proteins work as little micro machines. And I mean, there are so many areas in science that I think would lend themselves to this kind of a presentation that I'm hoping it'll work out.
Yeah, I think there's room for it in the field. I hope that this is as successful as it should be, and you're able to recoup your costs and such. So, let's see. Would it be possible to hear another one of the poems for our audience?
Sure. Since you mentioned Io, why don't we go there?
Io's pretty awesome. I'm a big fan of volcanoes. There's a volcano that's been erupting in Iceland for the last 6 months that I visited just when the break of the pandemic happened in June, and you were finally able to travel. So I'm always excited to hear about volcanoes.
Okay, the violent volcanoes of Io. Round Jupiter are moons galore. Of large moons, there are 4. Plus scores that are far smaller moons, and we may yet find more. The innermost is Io, and it has a pizza face. Near Jupiter in just 2 days, it swings full round the place. Big Jupiter's so close it fills a large part of the view. Io smells like burning matches. SO2's this noisome brew. 400 huge volcanoes belch this poison to the sky. It comes from Io's twisted heart. Close Jupiter is why. The gravity of Jupiter and other moons nearby pulls and twists poor Io's shape, which causes friction high. This heats up Io's inner rocks until they are quite gooey. That mess squirts out through volcanoes like Rocky Ratatouille. These violent, huge eruptions blow 300 miles in space, and lava mars the surface of poor Io's blemished face.
Great, thank you for that.
And speaking of the Icelandic eruption, this is a photograph from a few years ago when another eruption stopped airline flights across the Atlantic for over a week.
Cool. So I guess a question for both of you, since one is an astrophotographer and one is a astrophysicist. Is it possible to see Io in the sky? Like with your naked eye?
With your naked
with a telescope, that a consumer grade telescope that somebody could obviously, like Hubble Space Telescope, yeah.
With your naked eye, no. But with a strong pair of binoculars or a very inexpensive astronomical telescope, you can not only see Jupiter, but its 4 large moons. They're referred to as Galilean moons because the first person to see them with a very crude telescope was Galileo. And the innermost of those 4 moons is Io.
I see.
You can see them right now in the sky. So Jupiter and Saturn are up, just after sunset. You can see them fairly low in the sky and over the next few hours. And if you've got some binoculars or a small telescope, you can see those moons pretty easily. See some nice red striping on Jupiter as well right now.
How easy is it to be able to discern between one moon and the next? Like there's a few of them, right? There's 4, but are they different colors so you could identify one as which, or?
Not really. And there's not always 4 of them because Io is so close to Jupiter that it is often behind the planet or in front of the planet, and with a small telescope you can't see it. But sometimes the other moons, like Europa, will also be obscured, or the others. So sometimes you just see 3, sometimes you see 4. And I think you'd have to basically go online and try to look at, Google which moons
Like
of
the orbits.
Jupiter are visible, and you get what's called an ephemera, which will tell you sort of where the moons are and what's available where.
Cool. Well, I guess my final question is, where can I buy this book?
Well, that's a good leading question. Thank you. It's available on Amazon, and it's in both Kindle and paperback formats. The paperback looks like this,
Ooh,
and
nice.
it's available on Amazon. Just Google or go to Amazon and search for Poems of the Planets. It'll come right up.
Cool. Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining us on Behind the Book.
We've known each other for more than half a century. We helped each other start our own companies. I want to ask you a question that's not about astronomy. It's not about poetry. It's about what our lives mean. What would you consider to be a successful, personally fulfilling outcome of the work you've done on creating this book and the poetry on young adolescents that would make you feel, yeah, this is just what I wanted to have happen?
That's a very Craig-like question. Thank you. It's the motivation for the book is very simple. I'm hoping that we can stimulate the interest of young people in pursuing a scientific education, whether they go into science or into technology would be something I would hope, obviously, because I think we make huge progress as a society through this. But I think that having an understanding of science helps people really understand the world and provide a very rational framework for understanding non-scientific problems and situations as well. So if we can get someone excited about science or further their existing excitement in science, then that would be all I could ask of this, and was my motivation in actually pursuing this project.
Hello. Sure. I figured, I guess I'll just basically just read it, I guess. But yeah, I really like the work. And it hit kind of close to home because it's basically part of why I'm a student at Caltech right now is because when I was really little, I was given the DK Visual Encyclopedia of Science. And those footnotes are kind of just like that, but back in 96 or whatever. And that had a huge effect on me as a kid. So it's really nice to see that. And I also happen to like poetry a lot. I write it as well. So this hit particularly close to home. So I'm really happy that it's really good to see this in action. And so I guess my question was just children's poetry is one of many humanities fields. I was curious what drew you to it, and if there's any other avenues you thought would have, or if there were any other avenues you would have done if that hadn't happened.
Well, what drew me to it at first was reading our kids' kids' poetry books, before they were going to sleep. So we Shel Silverstein or all sorts of really interesting poetry books, and somehow that got me writing poetry. And the next thing I knew, I had this half-finished poem about the solar system, which I had totally forgotten about. So it was in some ways very serendipitous, but it was, or accidental. But it's because I can see how kids really can respond well to poetry, and this seemed like an interesting way in, especially for kids who think science is too hard.
That's,
Thank you.
that's great. Did you have a follow-up on that, John, or are you good?
Maybe a random one.
go ahead.
Just like the poetry side. How'd you pick the meter? I know, like, because there's Dr. Seuss used one, and like you used another. And I don't know. How do you choose?
Well, I'm not sure, because I actually started using it 30 years ago, and I completely forgot that I actually had this poem. So how I ended up picking that meter for this particular poem, which is different from the meters of the other kids' poems I had written, I'm sorry, I've got no idea. But once I had it, it seemed to work, and so it worked for that first overview poem. So I just continued it throughout the whole book.
Victoria wants to know if the book's available anyplace other than Amazon, or if it's Amazon exclusively right now.
At this point, it's just Amazon. I am ordering a print run of hardback books, but they won't be available really till the end of November. And at that point, I can get it into the hands of an academic book distributor that sells to bookstores and schools and things like that. And so bookstores don't order through Amazon. They order through these academic distributors. So I'm still working my way through that part of this whole publishing process. It turns out that the reason publishers get most of the money for a book is they do most of the work.
Mm-hmm. And she also asked, Vicki also asked, and she's a talented musician too, so this is actually interesting. Has anyone shown any interest in setting these poems to music?
Never heard of that idea, but it's kind of an interesting one.
It is, isn't it?
Thank you for the idea.
And she can play the piano like nobody's business. Just
Yes,
so you know.
indeed.
Well, I guess I do have a question before I go into my closing comments for everybody. I'm not aware of that many of any other book actually where there's all the information is in the book in the terms of the poetry in your case and the footnotes, but then you also are giving links to other kinds of information that is part of your website. And I'm thinking that this may be a signal for the future where other authors are going to start looking at not just presenting the information in the book alone, but are going to have multiple avenues of information available to readers, particularly the ones that are curious and want to go deeper and deeper into the subject of the book. Eric and Catherine, are you familiar with anything else like this?
I'm not necessarily, but Catherine maybe.
No, I mean, nothing comes to mind anyway.
I might use that. I might show people what that would look like. There's a website that you don't have to buy the book for. Anybody can go to it, called poemsoftheplanets.com. And the idea was to expand on the information in the poems in case kids want to go deeper, or in case teachers want to use it with their class. And at first I was having links in the book to all sorts of other websites, and Catherine made a very astute suggestion, which is don't do that, go through your website and then have your website in turn put a link, because the links will change, and this way you can manage it on your website. So that's what I've done. So let me bring the website up. The website has a homepage and then talks about the book. But the key thing is that there is a page of projects in which there are 13 projects that relate to the various poems, and that either parents can do with students, or more advanced students can do themselves, or teachers can do with students. Whether that's assembling a scale model of the solar system, which, by the way, if you make a scale model that is the size of a football field, the sun is a little smaller than a golf ball, and the Earth is about 1/100 of an inch in diameter. But I do two different scale models that are interesting. But students could build either one by having their peers go out and stand at different places. And hold up different objects to represent the different planets in the solar system, or the different shapes of an ellipse, or even when Venus is visible. And so, when Venus is visible, will take you, in fact, to a website or a project where you can, have a student and a light and you position a ball in 4 different locations. And sure enough, here they can't really see it because the bright light is in their eyes. They can't see it behind the ball, the light, but they can see it to the sides. So that's one example, or a couple of examples of the projects. But the other links in the book go to this page, and if they type in the exact link, it'll take them to a particular link here, and they can then visit that particular site. And there's some pretty interesting things here, whether it's flying a model plane over Meteor Crater in Arizona, or, for example, there's an animation here of, this is an animation of what it would be like to fly through Jupiter's atmosphere and then into its red spot. If we got a moment, I could play that one. On the left side, it's showing the altitude above the surface of the atmosphere. So 2,000 kilometers above the surface. You're here, you're coming down to it. You're approaching the red spot, but you don't get into it until you actually get under the surface. We're now 500 kilometers, 200, 100. We're in the surface. We're flying through it. You can also see the temperature going up. Now we're in the red spot. We fly around in the red spot for a bit, and then we come up out of the red spot. And you can see where our altitude is now climbing, and we're continuing to climb out of the great red spot of Jupiter. And so this is the kind of thing that I think if there was a teacher who was teaching about Jupiter, that this is the kind of video that would really stimulate their students' interest. By the way, in terms of the red spot, because we have a pretty cool illustration in here of the size of the Jupiter's great red spot. If you look at it, this is the red spot on Jupiter. And when we go to the footnotes, what we did is we superimposed the Earth as if it was being suspended or floating in the red spot to give you an idea of just how large that superstorm is on Jupiter. So in any case, that's the links to those videos and other resources are in the book. They take you to my website, which in turn takes you to the other websites that have these resources.
Hi, Eric. Thanks so much. This is just a delightful presentation. One of my favorite things about poems and poetry is hearing the authors read their poems aloud or speak their poems aloud, partially because when we read it to ourselves, we have a sense of the meter and what words are important. But it was fascinating at the very beginning and then in the middle of the presentation to actually hear you interpret your own words. And I would love to hear more of those poems, maybe as something that would be linked to your website, to hear you read your own poems, so we have an idea of what they sound like coming from your voice.
You're a font of good ideas. This is great. I think I'll do that. I'll record a few of them and put them on the website.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ed, thank you very, very much. And I want to add thanks to you and to Dwayne Miles, our stage manager, and to Leslie Maxfield over at Academic Media Technology that just handles all of the webcasts that we do with such grace and wonder. It's just a remarkable help that they've given us all through this pandemic as we moved ourselves from a live presenter into a webcasting presenter. I also want to remind everybody that on November 18th at 5 o'clock, we will have another Behind the Books with Carolyn Campbell and Caltech professor Jed Buchwald taking a look at her book, City of Immortals. And she'll be interviewing the ghosts of 3 scientists. So please join us and discover which 3 scientists who are buried at Père Lachaise are being interviewed that evening. Tomorrow night, there's a Watson lecture. And you can keep in touch with us and find out about all of our events by signing up at events.caltech.edu, and you'll be on our mailing list if you want, and you'll be able to look at our archives. This particular interview will be posted probably no later than the end of the week, and you can tell your friends to find it there as well. And we look forward to being in touch with you about our finally returning to Beckman Auditorium sometime next year. We're still waiting for good clearance on all of the health concerns that we have during this pandemic. So again, many thanks to Cameron, to Catherine, and to Eric Guerin for bringing us an evening on Poems of the Planets, Solar System Science in Verse and Prose. Thank you all for being with us this evening. Good evening.
Bye-bye.